Okay, so who are we? We are an open community for developers. We focus our conversations around Kotlin and Android. So it's an open community if you are a developer and if you want to learn Kotlin and development around Android and mobile development in general. So this is the community you should definitely be a part of. We organize regular monthly meetups. We love Kotlin. Kotlin is one of the fastest and one of the fastest growing languages in the world. It is the preferred language for Android development right now. And our conversations are, like I said, they're very centered to Kotlin and Android. So we recently launched our website as well, which is kotlinmumbai.tech. If you guys want to connect with us, want to revisit some of the events we have done in the past, connect with our speakers, and read about some of our policies and stuff that we are doing at Kotlin Mumbai, this is the place to go to. So check out our website. It's live. We recently launched it last month. Okay, about our team, myself, I'm Siddhesh Patil. I work on a platform called Paytm. So Paytm is one of the leading payments platforms in India. I work as an Android and iOS developer there. I have been working with some of the top banks in India before that, and I maintain my website, which is truestart.com, where I regularly blog about Kotlin and Android and about the events and some of the experiences around the events that we do at Kotlin Mumbai. So you can check out my website and connect with me via the website.
Hi, I'm Rishit. I'm a grade 10 student and a past TEDx and TEDx speaker. I'm majorly an AI and Android enthusiast and also a Google certified mobile site developer. I've often represented my country, India, in international level hackathons and competitions, and also won a few of them. And guess what? I love to conduct research and have written 7 research papers too. And here at Kotlin Mumbai, I try to organize and maybe give talks about events related to Android. So I also maintain a website called Rishit.tech where I put all of the so I'm also a constant tech speaker. So I put all of my talks and resources to learn about it and almost everything about me. So connect me over there.
Yeah, hi. I'm Chintan Parmar. I work as an Android developer. I'm passionate about making great apps with amazing UI that is too responsive. Currently, I'm working on HDFC's merchant application where I do development. And when I'm not on my laptop, I'm probably in the kitchen cooking up some interesting recipes. For knowing about my social media handles and all, you can find me everything on chintan.app, which is my website, which I made live last week. So you can find me there.
Sorry to interrupt, Rishit, but you're on mute. You will have to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. So we have a Discord community, which is pretty new. If you are not from Mumbai or India too, you can still join the Discord community. We have the people who have actually made Kotlin, the people who have worked on Kotlin, made it possible to you in the Discord group, and more to join. And as I said, it's a pretty decent group. Oh, we kind of just launched it, made it public, I don't know, 15 or 20 days back. So, yeah, I've pasted the link in the chat and let's carry forward the conversation over there, have conversations over there too. So, with that, let's come to the main topic we are all here for the talk, which I'm sure you might be excited about. So, Victoria is a senior Android engineer at Meetup, and almost everyone uses Meetup, right? A major reason behind this is it's easily accessible to all. And Victoria will be showing you how you can do this with your apps. She also loves speaking at tech conferences and events. She further writes for Rave Village and is a part of the resident author team. She has also co-authored the book Android Test-Driven Development by Tutorials. So be sure to give it a read. All over to you, Victoria.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. Let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Present. this screen. All right, you should see my slides now. As we get started and I'm going through my introduction, I encourage you to go to menti.com and enter this code. You don't need to set up an account or anything. Just enter this code and you'll see a prompt there that I'll talk about in a moment. This is a way that we will be just interacting with each other throughout the talk. What we're going to be doing is creating a word cloud together throughout the talk. I will give you prompts along the way. If there's anything between those prompts that strikes you as important or a key idea, you're welcome to add that as well. And at the end, we can look at the cloud that we make together. I think word clouds are fun. Hopefully you all do too. So it's just a fun way to collectively share ideas about that. Once you're in, you can, for your first prompt, just what do you think of when you think of accessibility and any other key things that you think is important to this? If at some point you lose this page, I also have this code at the bottom of all of my slides. It's a little bit small, but it's there if you need it. And I'll come back to this if we need to come back to it. I will have a couple spots throughout the way for questions, so please hold your questions for then. And if you also drop your questions in the chat, it'll help me to stay focused on what your question is and go on less tangents. This talk will be focused on kind of like a broad look at accessibility and how to make your app accessible. It's a bit platform agnostic. So whether you're working on Android or on the web or on iOS or anywhere that you have a user interface, you can use these things. It might not be your typical talk that you see at like a language meetup. This is specifically Kotlin. It's something that I feel that all developers should be aware of, especially when they're working on user-facing code. So I'm going to pull away this cloud real quick. You can continue to add things, and it'll continue updating over here. But while you're doing that, we're going to start talking about what is accessibility. And really, it's a lot of things. In short, it's a way to make your app available to use by more people. An app is accessible if anyone can use it independently without assistance from another person. This is largely thought about when it comes to supporting people with disabilities, such as vision, hearing, or motor disabilities. It also covers cognitive and mental health disorders. And next is, well, why should you care? Why should you care to make your app accessible? And there's a lot of reasons, from product to personal to legal, and we'll talk about all of them. Starting with, and this is what I really want to focus on today, it makes a better product. And not only for people who may have disabilities, but really for everyone. Part of that could be serving people who may have temporary disabilities, such as if you're driving and shouldn't be looking at your screen, or if you broke your wrist and it's hard to use your phone with maybe your dominant hand. If you just had your eyes dilated and everything is really bright, and other everyday things. It also includes other things that a lot of us use all the time, such as keyboard navigation, especially like if you're on a website on your desktop, using escape to close a modal or enter to submit a form or tab to advance to the next form field, having captions on videos if you don't want to have the sound on, customizations, such as maybe including dark mode or having special audio settings. Even like the fact that your phone vibrates is an accessibility thing. It also means you'll have more consistent and predictable layouts, which makes it easier for anyone to use. Having an accessible app also gives you a wider audience of people who can use your app. People with disabilities represent one of the largest minority groups. And this statistic is from the US, but according to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults in the US have some type of disability. I don't know what those numbers are in any of the other countries that you're coming from, but I'm assuming it's relative. But by catering to this group, you have access to a larger user base, and who doesn't want that? It can also help drive innovation when you're supporting accessibility. Creating apps for accessibility does mean working within constraints. So maybe you can't fit as much content on the screen. And this means you have to really think about what's important, where it's located, and in doing that, making it a better experience for everyone. And then, and this one, again, might vary per country, the reality is that there can be lawsuits because your app isn't accessible. By supporting accessibility guidelines before there's a lawsuit, you save time in the end. Again, I don't know exactly what the compliance is for different locations. I know in the US we have ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and there's similar things in other countries. So depending on where your app is being used, you may have to comply to some of these things. And then also, because we care about our users, it's, I believe, the right thing to do. We want to be an inclusive society that takes care of our neighbors. Imagine, especially with the pandemic going on, imagine being under shelter in place and not being able to order food because the app isn't accessible to you. So here, our first question will be, who can test for accessibility improvements? So this is a prompt that you can add your answers to the word cloud. There's lots of different answers you can put for this. Just put whatever you think of, and I'll talk about my answer to this in a moment. So here is the word cloud that we are working through. Just jumping over to the chat, are there any questions that we have so far? I know we've only gone through the introduction, so there might not be one yet. Okay, I don't see any over there. So great, we can keep going. The answer I would give to this is anyone who is willing to. Anyone can use the tools and learn what they need to improve the accessibility. Sure, some people who aren't used to using some of the tools, especially on a day-to-day basis, like some people do, because that's how they need to in order to perceive what's on their screen, they might not catch all of the same things. They might not know which is the right answer. That doesn't mean that they can't look to see what might be some obvious improvements or where they might want to ask questions to see what the behavior should be if they don't know. So I would say anyone who wants to. So how can you do that? We're going to look over some accessibility tools and some ways that you can test. There are modified ways that people can consume our apps. There's screen readers like TalkBack on Android and VoiceOver on iOS and similar ones on the web. And that's one way that people consume apps. It allows users to traverse the screen, sometimes without touch, and understand what's on the screen without sight. There's also things like switch access and braille readers that kind of follow the same thing, a different way of perceiving and navigating the screen. Some familiar ways to think about this might be using an app on a TV, using like the next and the selected buttons. You can't, in a lot of cases, I'm sure there are some touchscreen TVs, but in a lot of cases, your TVs aren't touchscreen. You're not going to walk up and touch the screen. That's why we have a remote. So you can think of using those next and select buttons kind of like a switchback. Another might be using your phone via the Google Assistant or Siri or the other assistants that are out there. Some people navigate their phone through voice, and you can kind of think of it a little bit that way. Display and font size can be made bigger for people with low visibility. And there are also some color corrections that help people with color blindness or other vision disabilities. So what are some of the things that we can use for testing? The most reliable and comprehensive of these are just manual or using testing, user testing, using simulators to be able to simulate having different disabilities, using these tools that other people use to navigate their phone yourself, and seeing if there's anything you can't reach, anything you can't understand, and also finding other people who do use these tools on a daily basis and letting them use their app, watching them, and seeing what feedback that they have. Some other things are scanners, like accessibility scanner on Android. There's accessibility inspector, Axe. There's different ones for web. I think one is Lighthouse. And we'll be going over the details of what one of these are, but essentially you can scan your app and give you some of the most common, like, easy fix exceptions that you can fix to make your app more accessible. There's also automated test. For example, on Android, you can plug in Espresso accessibility, and within your pre-existing UI tests, it will check for accessibility issues. And then there's also some lint checks out there. So right in your editor, your linter can catch if there's something that you should add, such as a content description. And out of all of these, the scanner, the automated test, the lint checks, they can miss things because not everything can be caught by just looking at basically a screenshot of the screen or by looking at the code. So that's why the most reliable is user or manual testing. This is what one of the scanners looks like. You can get the accessibility scanner in the Play Store. When you have it open, you can basically scan your app. For this, we are scanning the Play Store, and then it can give some suggestions of how you might be able to make improvements. An example is touch targets in this case, and then you can look up to see if that makes sense to solve. And these are similar errors that are brought up by the end-to-end testing with, for example, Espresso. We're going to be looking at the web content accessibility guidelines. We don't have time to go over everything, but we will hit some of the things that you're most likely to run into. Just realized you can't see my slides right now. So let's go back to that. This is the scanner. I think that was the most important thing for you to see. All right. Web content accessibility guidelines. Like I said, we don't have time to go over everything that's there, but we'll hit some of the main things that you're most likely to run into. And you can kind of think of this as like a sample platter. And the goal of this is when you're making a product decision or you're working in the code, you can think back and remember, I think there was an accessibility argument about that. Let me remind myself before deciding. So WCAG uses 4 categories to organize the guidelines. We'll describe what these dimensions are and then dig a little deeper into how you can support them. And the first is perceivable. This requires thinking about ways that people can consume content. Can everything on your screen be read with a screen reader? If there's an audio cue, is there another way to receive the cue? So here's your next prompt to kind of think about this. To add to the word cloud is, what is a way that people can perceive your app? For example, maybe through sight. That's how a lot of us perceive our apps. So go ahead and go back to menti.com with that code and enter in some ways that you think about how people can perceive your app. Let's go back. Yes, sorry, I was only showing the slide. Thank you for adding the link to the accessibility scanner. Were there any other quick questions while we're in here adding our ideas to the cloud? All right, I don't hear any and I don't see anything, so let's keep going. You can continue to add these to the cloud. I'm going to actually go back to the slides this time. Sorry about that before. But feel free to continue entering anything that you have according to that prompt or any other key points that you notice. All right, so there are different ways that people perceive the app. Maybe it's through sight, maybe it's through some of those screen readers, maybe that's through audio, could be through braille, there's haptic feedback, that's one way to perceive. So many different ways. So we want to think about the different ways that we can cater to these. And one of the first is through making sure you have correct labeling, whether that's a content description on images and buttons without readable text. So if there's like a button with just like a pencil, you want it to say edit. You don't want it to say unlabeled button or pencil. You want the user to know what it's for if they can't see that this is an edit button. And the same applies for inputs. Make sure inputs are clearly labeled for what they are for. And there's specific attributes that it's like, this is a label for this text field. One exception to this might be if the image doesn't need to be perceived to operate your app, such as if it's a decoration, like maybe a divider or a logo. In that case, you should set it up such that the screen reader knows you can skip it. For Android, this might be setting the content description to like the @ symbol null or important for accessibility false. There's slight differences between those, and we won't go into that right this second, but those are ways that you can have the screen reader just ignore that view because it's not important for anyone to see. It's okay if they don't perceive it. And then you need to think about time-based media. Not everyone can watch videos or listen to audio. If you have an onboarding tutorial video, is there maybe text along to go with it, or maybe captions? Does your app use audio cues to let the user know that something happened? Is there another way you can give that cue? Imagine downloading an app and not being able to get past the onboarding because you can't access the instructions in a way you can perceive. It also helps if you download an app and you don't want to watch the onboarding video because maybe there's like a sleeping kid next to you and you don't want to wake up your child that's asleep. And then also rewinding and skipping is also really helpful. And this is for a variety of reasons. Maybe the movement of a video or an animation could cause nausea. It could cause others anxiety if they feel they missed something and they can't go back, or if they feel there's limited time to absorb some bit of information. People with motor or cognitive disabilities might need more time as well. Finally, motion and animation can be distracting for some and detract from what it is you're actually trying to communicate. This also helps if you download the app and you miss the onboarding video because you have an awake and a very loud kid next to you. Next, we have relationship and ordering. Most screens will traverse the screen from the top start to bottom end. This also happens to be the way most humans consume content. You want to group things together that should be read at the same time, such as maybe a label and a value. This not only helps people who use screen readers, but also if you want to port your app over for maybe Chromebook or Mac OS or TV. In this screenshot, it's another screenshot of the Play Store, and there's a green box around the previously installed app, an arrow to go there, and then a subtext, give one a go. So all of this is grouped together. So it's all read together. It's all perceived together when using a screen reader or maybe a remote on a TV. You don't want to have to go to previously installed apps, then hit next, give one a go, then hit next, then have the arrow, and then be able to perform that action. It all makes sense to group it together. Also, sensory cues. You don't want to rely on only a visual or audio cue to convey information. Because if you're only using one of them, they might not be perceivable. An example might be when an error pops up on a screen. Does someone who's using a screen reader know that there's a new error? If you're using something like a snack bar on Android, it's already has that accessibility built in. It'll announce it to the user that there's a snack bar that popped up and what the text is. But if you're doing something custom, you might want to use something to let the user know that something changed. And this helps anyone who might have looked away from their phone for a moment and missed the transition, especially if you're only using something like the color changed or the size or something swiped across the screen. If something is temporary, especially, this can help if you have another option. One thing that surprised me when I learned it is that being able to support both portrait and landscape is part of the accessibility guidelines. There are some exceptions, but you should support both where you can. And this is for the case for, imagine having low mobility and having your screen on a mount on your wheelchair. It's not easy, or in some cases possible, to change the orientation of the device in order to use the app. So you have to support both if you want anyone to be able to use it. This is also helpful for others who just might feel more comfortable using their phone with a specific orientation, such as when using it with one hand. I know when I'm carrying something and I'm using my phone in one hand, I only want to use it in portrait. And then color contrast. This is another one that is often picked up by scanners. Any text that needs to be distinguishable in red needs to have a contrast of 7:1 for most text and 4.5:1 for large text. And again, exceptions include things like decorations or logos, things that you don't actually need to see. There are similar contrast rules for other controls like buttons that need to be perceivable. And one way that this often applies to me is I use digital well-being to make my phone grayscale after a certain time at night. If an app doesn't have adequate color contrast, it becomes hard for me to use just because I have my phone in grayscale. And that kind of simulates some types of color blindness or other vision impairments. Similar to audio and other visual cues, it shouldn't be the only way that you communicate things is with color. For example, don't only use like red and green to show something as a success or failure. You should also use something like icons or text in case the colors aren't perceptible. I have an app that uses color as one way to show if an answer is right and if it's wrong. This app becomes harder to use after my phone becomes grayscale just because it's like, is it right or wrong? Okay. It takes that extra second to figure that out. All right, now font and display size. If someone has the font size bumped way up, you should still be able to use your app like normal. As we age and our vision ultimately deteriorates, we'll all be thankful for this one. One of the easiest ways to violate this is if you assume a text view will always be under a certain width or height. You want to be able to stretch this, especially with the height, because the height of the text can change. And when you are constrained to maybe a single line, you want to make the decision of if it's okay to ellipsize this text. Is it okay if you don't read all of it? In this screenshot of the Play Store with the text size bumped right up, we have recommended for ... If you were building this, you'd have to make the decision, do you have to know what comes after this ... in order to use this app? Do we need to allow this to go onto multiple lines? In the case of when text views are next to each other, constraint layout flows can help to bump a view to the next line if needed. And then here's just a side-by-side for you of the large size versus the default. You can see on the left, it has the entire recommended for you. And on the right, it only has the recommended for ... And you can see some other places that this affects. So the next category is operable. Can you navigate and perform actions with a keyboard or talkback? Are buttons big enough to press? And this, can someone operate your app? Can everyone operate your app? And here's our next prompt. What is a way people can operate your app? For example, with the touchscreen. So go ahead and add your answers here. Here's another opportunity for some questions. If you have any, go ahead and unmute yourself or drop them in the app. We'll also have time at the end to answer more questions. And I see some great answers coming in. Some of the answers that I came up with were touchscreen, gestures, audio, switch access. There's some good ones in here too. I'm trying to catch which ones are new. Maybe one is speech. So there's a lot of different ways that people can operate your app, and go ahead and continue to add those. Back to the slides. So one thing you have to think about when you're thinking about making your app operable is navigation. And one of the best ways to understand this is to try it out yourself or watch someone try it. As you walk through the screen, can you reach everything that's on it? Does the order make logical sense? An example of something that might not make logical sense is if you reach submit before you reach all the fields in a form. Are things grouped in a way that makes sense? Or is something repetitive? And if the user reaches a button on the screen, is it clear what action it performs? When they reach it, do they know what's going to happen when they click that button? And this is more than just for screen readers. It can cause anxiety for a user if they don't know what will happen when they press a button. So you should make that as clear as possible. When I press this button, is it going to give me a confirmation screen, or is it going to charge my credit card? I'd like to know that before I press the button. Finally, this is another case that would make it possible to build your app for desktop or TV. And then timing. This one applies, again, for so many reasons. If something is showing and hiding, someone who is slower at consuming the information might miss it. This could be because of a disability or simply because of an outside distraction. And the argument is similar with those for motor restrictions, whether a temporary disability or permanent disability. It's also better for users with anxiety to not have those time limits to contribute to any of those anxious feelings. And there are exceptions for this one. For example, if something goes out of stock or if it's a time-based game, you obviously can't change the timings on those. Maybe for the game if you have a specific setting for that. But if it's a time-based game, maybe the only option is to extend that time. Another thing to note around timing is that you should avoid flashing things. I think the guideline is 3 or more flashes you're not allowed to do. And this is both because of seizures, which is a very important thing and it's very dangerous. That and things are harder to perceive while they're flashing. It's just harder to use. And then gestures and pointers. These covers things that might take multiple fingers, like pinching to zoom out, or maybe a slider. In case someone isn't able to maybe pinch for some reason or another, there should be another way to accomplish the task. An idea of an additional way to access the functionality of zooming in on a photo might be that slider with arrows. And for single touch actions, there should be a way to back out or undo. This might be if you move your finger off of the button before you lift it, that can be a way to just not perform it. And this is the default action for buttons in most platforms, or having an undo or back option if you can't have that. These options are good for everyone, especially in the case for one-handed use. All right, and then touch targets. This is another one that's often flagged by those automatic scanners and testers. And you want to make sure like buttons and other interactable items are large enough to interact with. Have you ever visited a website on your phone or even an app and struggled to click on a link or a button that was just too small? You're like, can I zoom in on this website? I want to make sure I click the right link. The recommended size for Android is 48 by 48 for anything clickable or interactable. And it also makes the actions in your app more clear if they're this size. Next is understandable. I know we've taken a lot of time to go through the first two. I promise these last two are a lot quicker. So understandable, not only can your content be perceived and operated on, but can you understand it? This includes things like limiting abbreviations or idioms. Is it clear why something errored? Is everything communicated effectively? And the first thing here that you might think about is internationalization and localization, which could be a whole talk in itself. It's a part of this, but not the only way to make your app more understandable. You can also avoid hard to read words and idioms, which are often culturally specific. You can avoid long blocks of text to improve the experience for everyone who actually reads long text anyway, unless you're specifically like in a news or blog post app. And it also has the added benefit of making it a better experience for users with autism. In general, you want your content to be easily digestible and make it easier to consume by everyone. And then watch for abbreviations. How many times have you run into an abbreviation that you don't know and it made you feel like old or awkward or out of touch because you had to look it up? Don't do that to your users. The internet does that to everyone enough. And then the same can go for emojis and icons. Symbols don't always mean the same thing to everyone. And then on the flip side, sometimes pairing icons with text can improve understandability. In addition, like some people comprehend words better and some consume images easier. And this is a thing that if you have a place where you might want text, you might not want text, it might be optional, maybe you can have a configuration for this. You also want consistency, and you want things consistent for everyone. Are you using send or submit throughout the app? Can you make them all the same? It also pays to have a consistent layout and ordering throughout the app. It makes the app much easier to navigate for everyone. And this is especially true for people using screen readers and users with autism. Finally, you don't want the context of where you are in the app to change unless the user performed an action to cause that change, such as pressing a button to navigate. This brings down the confusion of where am I and how did I get here? A mini version of this would be if you click into an input field and the hint or label goes away. What if the user gets pulled away and when they come back, it's unclear to them what this input is for? And our final category is robust. And this is just that it works on multiple different types of devices in general and different assistive technologies. If you're using native components, this is largely taken care of for you. So we won't spend too much extra time on it here. This is something to look at if you have highly customizable views and interactive views like drawing on a canvas. You should make sure your custom view is hooked into the accessibility services correctly. And then one final note that I'll add here is the more configurable you make your app, the more accessible it will be. Be it color schemes, audio settings, animations, and more. Everyone, regardless of ability, has different needs and preferences. If you let others use the app in a way that's best for them, it will mean a more quality product. And in the end, I want you to build quality apps because you care about having a quality app. And I want you to build accessible apps for the caring world you want to live in. And I want to thank you for listening. I'm here for questions as long as the call is open. I'm also available online after that. Find me on Twitter at @TTGonda. I'm also on LinkedIn if that's more your thing. I believe that's my LinkedIn's linked to on the Meetup page. You can also drop questions on the Meetup page. I think there's a Slack for this Meetup group. I'll be there as well. All of these slides and resources can be found on my website, victoriagonda.com. And I will also try to post them in the chat as soon as I'm not presenting these slides. So let's have one more question. What things can you remember to look for to keep your app accessible? What are your, let's say, 3 biggest takeaways from this talk? And let's add them to our word cloud. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening. It looks like we have questions now, so we can go into questions. Let's see. Questions.
So,
Any?
yeah.
Go ahead.
So there actually came 3 questions in the chat by Nick. So his first question is there any React Native support library for accessibility? So you showed a few examples about the Android support libraries. So he's asking about React Native ones.
Probably. React Native is pretty mature at this point, so I suspect that there would be. I personally don't have any experience with React Native. I do know that most mature frameworks do have some accessibility support. So I would suspect yes. I personally haven't worked with it.
So second is a fun question for you. What's your favorite app?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm just looking at my app list so I don't forget them real quick. I'm probably gonna say Pocket Casts. That's the one that that's one that I paid for it because I love it. But I feel like, I don't know, it's beautiful material design. I like the features that it has for listening to my podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So it's one that I use all the time, and I think the design is really well, and it always seems to work well.
Sorry, didn't get the name of the app. Sorry.
Sorry, Pocket Casts. I can type it in the chat too. It's a podcast app.
Great. So we have a third question by Nikhil again. Do you use any app for increasing productivity? What I think he means is any kind of, I don't know, Nikhil, do you mean some kind of library for doing accessibility easily? Any any library which kind of increases your productivity while ensuring accessibility in your app? Is that what you meant?
Right. In the day-to-day Android development, so this is going to be my fourth question. And in the day-to-day development, do you have a checklist or any sort of any library which reminds you that okay, all of these things you need to add for accessibility?
Yeah. As far as like productivity in my day-to-day development, outside of accessibility, I'm kind of boring. I usually like your general like Android Studio and doing all of my configuration and stuff there. All of the tools that it's growing, how much it supports, and I have like a whole bunch of like filters set up in Gmail, so everything filters the way that I want there, and also a lot of different like settings and specific things that I have in Slack. So it's a lot of like using like the same tools that everyone uses. I just really like configuring them to try to make them work the best for me. And then when it comes to accessibility, this is something I'm currently working on, trying to see how others might benefit from having maybe checklists or something, especially on my team, to make it easier for everyone to support accessibility. One thing is I'm trying to integrate more of the accessibility tests into our test suite and making sure we have all of our screen tests. I'm seeing if we can add automatic linters just so it's easier to remember those things. So any of that I can automate through like linters or tests, I'm trying to do that. I have a personal checklist for myself that I'm working on trying to fine tune in a way that I can share and apply to multiple apps, not just the one that I'm working on. So as far as like team things, I'm seeing what ways I can automate. As far as personally, I do have checklists that I use. Oh, cool. You had another question right up to the slide. Is there any good resource on how to test if the app is properly accessible via switch access? Part of this is those like automated things that say if you have a content description, like the screen reader will say that. Aside from that, the biggest way to test this is to turn on switch access on your phone. You can set it up where like you can use the volume buttons to advance and select. And that's really the best way to see if it's accessible via switch access. If you give me a ping on any of the social medias, I can find a link for you to learn how to set that up. What Android Studio plugins do you use? The first one that I miss when I am on a new computer or something is Idea Vim. I don't use a lot of Vim, but the little bit of Vim that I do use, I miss when I don't have. So that's the first thing that I miss. The other things that I use, I have a GraphQL one just because I'm working with GraphQL. I have a GitHub one that I really like. It has the commit message next to any change. I don't remember the name of that one. I'd have to look it up. But that's really helpful for like understanding on the go why a change was made. ID Vim. Those are the only ones that are coming to my mind right now. I'm sure there's plenty more. But those are what I know I miss when I move and don't have it.
I have a
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how much of so user experience entirely when you are building a product, user experience is something you have to look for, right? Like whenever you're designing it and thinking it, through and through. So how much of accessibility falls under UX, right? Because you have to think about it in that sense as well.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of it falls onto UX. A lot of these things you might have noticed are things that you need to think of in the design phase. Is this button big enough? You're going to want to ask your designer about that. So I've been working on, and this is different on any teams, bringing that awareness to our designers. If I see something in a design, thankfully I'm able to be involved in the design phases where I'm able to bring up questions. It's like, oh, I noticed this contrast is pretty low. Is that what we wanted? Do we need everyone to be able to perceive this? So there are those things. There are other things that I'll do like a gut check with like UX, because like, I think these two things should be grouped together and read together. Let's see what like product or design thinks about that. Do they agree with that? So yes, a lot of that does come in like the design and product stages. And I try to make it my responsibility as a developer who is passionate about this, that if our product designers aren't aware of these things, or just simply forget something because there's so many different things that we're trying to all keep in our brains at once, to bring awareness to it, bring it up in a kind way, being like, hey, I noticed this. What do you think? Were you aware of this? Just to bring it up and try to keep our app as accessible as possible. I know the Meetup.com app has areas of the app that aren't that great, and I'm working on what can I do to fix that, because in the history of the app, not all developers have had this on the front of mind. So it's one thing to, like, as we're building new things, how can we have this in the minds of product, of design, of engineers, as well as how do we fit it into our workflow to repair some of these older things in our legacy code. I hope that answered your question. I think I went on a tangent.
That's fine. I mean, that's a broad topic in its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you go and talk about it. So one area where I feel a lot of design is, so when you're building an application, you want to have a design or a UX of its own, right? If you look at Spotify or if you look at Netflix, they have a sort of design, that is very consistent across platforms. But often these apps break, the OS level interactions that are there. They won't follow that. A good example of it is in Netflix. If you open a list or a movie detail, it will show you a cross icon to just close that screen. But on iOS, the usual way to go back is you just swipe through the left and it will just close the window. Similarly, on Android as well, like there are various UX or interactions that are not followed entirely when an app is built. So how much of a product's design in its own and its interactions in its own right, how much of that affects an operating system's interactions? Does that affect accessibility?
It can. A lot of, not all, but a lot of the like system level navigation things, the system will take care of how accessible that is, how someone can navigate that. If you're overriding it, like maybe some of these companies are and doing their own thing, then you want to make sure that you're hooking into the accessibility systems, because then you can break them. This becomes easier to manage if you have like a design system and reusable components, that if you make the reusable component accessible, you only have to worry about it once. Like maybe you have custom navigation that you have where you're using a gesture. Making sure that your custom gesture will be navigable is one way to look at that. Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on, are you depending on the system navigation that like might have gestures and stuff? If it's the system stuff and it's differing per system, like between Android and iOS, then the platform probably takes care of it. But if you are creating your own to make it maybe consistent across apps or across frameworks, then you have to make sure that the custom thing that you're doing does interact with the accessibility guidelines correctly.
Yeah, that answers it pretty much. So it's more of being following a guideline or a certain UX practice that'll make it more easier. Okay, I think if anyone has any more questions to ask, now is the time.
Yeah, you can just unmute yourself or even put them in the chat.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up. Victoria, it's very nice to have you with us, and you spoke about accessibility, some of the topics that we usually don't talk about on Kotlin. We are very Kotlin centric, so this was a fresh, talk on product and addressing accessibility. So thank you for joining us, taking out time today, and being a part of the community. And
Yep. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So, a quick trivia question for the people who have not left the meet, and so this is something cool I came across while exploring. So I just thought to make it a quick trivia question. So, why is accessibility also called A11Y? And I love the answer of it. So, anyone, just unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
I have the answer, but I don't want to give it away for other people.
Yeah, it's such a cool answer. Never thought it would turn out like this. So, I guess no one. Victoria, would you like to?
The explanation that I'd heard is that how you spell accessibility is A, then 11 letters, and then Y. So it's basically because we're all lazy and accessibility is a long word to spell.
Yeah, I love the way it has kind of short form. Okay, so
Me too.
yeah, that's about it. All over to Chintan. Chintan.
Yeah. So that was all about the event. Soon we are going to share the feedback form on our Twitter handle, which is Scotland Mumbai. So anybody has whatever feedback to share, they can post on that form.
we also will be sharing the video for this, the recording for this on our channel, and we'll share the link as well, so you can revisit this in the future uh, in case you want to. So I think that is it today for guy. That is it today. We will meet you in the next meetup and hope to bring more stuff to you guys. If you have any feedback about the community, you can share that with us, and we'll do our best to improve the community for all of you. So thanks, Victoria. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.